I really liked this question because I really think we could each have a completely different answer as far as, in the end, who will be the Jaguars' best offseason acquisition. He gave 4 choices. You can pick something else, but Brian Thomas Jr., Eric Armstead, Mitch Morse, as far as players are concerned, or defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen. Mia, I'll start with you. Who is your answer?
My answer is Ryan Nielsen, just because I expect, in terms of, I know what I'm going to get, and I don't think Ryan Nielsen, knock on every piece of wood you can find, heaven forbid, those other players may suffer injuries. There may be other things at play. I think we can bank on Ryan Nielsen for 17 games. At least that's the hope, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're safe in saying that.
Well, hopefully more than 17 games, but yes.
Exactly. Well said. Well said, Lauren.
It was fun to see the pictures of the stash out there at OTAs, which is, of course, Ryan Nielsen's mustache.
Yes. And I think that maybe it's me viewing this question through the lens of what I've been told by our contemporaries in Atlanta, who, from people who work in that building, people who work on staff I've spoken to, people who cover the Atlanta Falcons, they were heartbroken when Ryan Nielsen left, not for a head coaching job, of which so many of them have said to me he will be a head coach in the National Football League in the next 5 years, but because he left for a defensive coordinator position and was able to walk scotch-free because of a new regime change coming in. And so maybe I'm just going off of what I've been told from the folks up there. I'm sure there's contemporaries in New Orleans that, may beg to differ, but I've heard from a lot of them that were big fans of Ryan Nielsen when he was there. And so, yes, for me, I think that will be the biggest difference. And I think if what I've reported and what so many of us here at 1010 have been told and have reported is true, this defense has talent. And with no disrespect to the previous coaching staff, if only, especially in the home stretch of the season last year, if those players were coached properly, told where to be, had communication between different position groups, and were able to come together and know where they're supposed to be in a critical game, Week 18 in Nashville, I feel like we are talking about the Jaguars in a completely different light on May 6, 2024 than we are today.
Yeah, what's your answer, Taylor?
Yeah, it's interesting to me just going off of what Mia said, because I even remember when the defensive side of the ball was fired, a lot of people were like, what? Why wasn't Press Taylor the one fired? I feel like our offense was the one that had issues all season. And I know there was injuries involved in that, but I've talked a lot about how I thought the defense saved the offense a lot in the first half of the season. So I still was I get there was a bit of a drop off late, but I think that they were doing so much throughout the season that at the end things kind of just collapsed. I do think Ryan Nielsen will help everything that we've heard. Obviously, he's a fantastic coach, so I am excited to see that. But I do think that the defense was kind of already there, and some pieces added will definitely even help him look better. But for me, the way the poll question was worded too is in the end, who's going to be the best. So I'm more so thinking not just in one season and multiple seasons when we're talking about who at the end of, not saying obviously not the end of the Jaguars, but the end of when maybe these guys are gone and we're done talking about them, who are we going to look back and say that's where my mind went?
Okay.
So I more so am thinking Brian Thomas, because I just think that with someone like this, he's obviously a young player, so he's going to hopefully be here longer, and we have a lot more. I mentioned last week about how I do think he'll have a little more development to get done, so it'll maybe in a couple years we're seeing the Brian Thomas that we'll have for the future. So that's where my mind went more, is I think that he's going to be here longer. I think he's going to be a big part of this offense for a while, and him and Trevor now have the opportunity to develop together through all of these years coming up. So to me, I'm going Brian Thomas, just because I do think he's going to be a part of this offense that we're going to be talking about for a while.
And it's funny, when I first, when I first read the question this morning and heard them discussing it, my immediate answer was Ryan Nielsen, because I think, to Mia's point, as far as players can get injured, sure, but I think it's more, he has such a stamp now on this defense, and I do think that the previous staff didn't utilize the talent that they had in the right way, and I think changing the defensive scheme is going to be huge for them, and really be able to allow Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker and whoever else they want to pass rush get after the quarterback. But I also could have gone Brian Thomas Jr. because I do think Trevor Lawrence hasn't had a weapon like him yet, and I think he's going to be incredibly important. But in the end, I will go with, just to be different, I'll go with Eric Armstead, Because as good as Ryan Nielsen, I think, is going to be, this team has not had a player like Eric Armstead in many years. And whether you want to compare him to Calais or you want to compare him to Marcel Darius as far as what he can do for that defensive front, he is going to clog the middle and he's going to get after the quarterback. And so, yes, while you have Josh and Trayvon and maybe Travis Gibson as well there as pass rushers, you also need an interior pass rush. And that's one thing that a year ago I wondered, what is this going to look like for the Jags? How are they going to get an interior pass rush?
Before or after?
The answer was they didn't.
Devon Hamilton and the illness.
After the illness.
Okay.
Yeah, I was confident with Roy Robertson Harris and Devon Hamilton. Maybe not as confident with Fadakasi, but I thought, well, he played this season, that prior season with the calf injury, so if he's fully healthy. But then once Devon had the illness, it was like, well, I really don't understand where this pass rush is going to come from in the interior. And yes, the two outside guys did as much as they certainly could, but I don't know that they'll necessarily get 27.5 sacks again, but you've got to get that interior pass rush.
And again, I want to speak to, I understand it was like the talking point on the Superstation across all programs last week. The reason they drafted Mason Smith, the reason they drafted Jordan Jefferson, the reason they drafted Miles Cole is because so many of you clamored last season for the lack of depth along the defensive line. There were also a good portion of the listening fan base that noted that perhaps the personnel last year was better suited for a 4-3. Mm-hmm. They have now done that. They have moved to a predominantly 4-3, although they will be multiple under Ryan Nielsen, and I firmly believe that. They have fortified that defensive line to the point that if Devon Hamilton was to go down again, if Roy Robertson Harris is to go down, there is not only proven depth below them on the depth chart, but there is also young, exciting developmental projects that aren't just 6th or 7th round picks that you're throwing a dart at below them on the depth chart, which says that you're also keeping an eye to the future and you're saying, yes, we are going to get tougher in the trenches. Yes, I understand so many of you thought when Trent Baalke said that would mean revamping the offensive line, but he actually meant revamping the defensive line. And real quick, I just want to make the point again for those who may be new to Helmets and Heels, or maybe, you're just hopping in your car for the first time, you're unfamiliar with what we're saying when we say that the change to Ryan Nielsen and his coaching staff, in my opinion, with the personnel that was already here, will pay off dividends. Again, I go back to what I was told by a source in February. Ryan Nielsen arrived in the building and he asked a player, how much time did you spend talking about alignments? And the player laughed and said 0% of the time.
Oof.
And then come to find out that in terms of conversations between certain position groups and those rooms with other position groups along the defensive front and those rooms, there was 0 to no communication the last 5 weeks of the season. And that can't happen. Again, the word alignment comes into play, but also physically, literally on the field in terms of scheme as well.
It's just so interesting to me, too. Like, I'm just wondering where Doug was, because
he was supposed to be babysitting, and that's,
have conversations, because we said the same thing about Press in certain moments when we were like, why was he still play calling? And it just let it happen. And then you're letting your coaches not even have conversations with the guys. Like, that's not the kind of like full on leadership that I really like. So hopefully things start changing, because that's honestly a little scary to hear.
And if you look at the overall rankings from last season, the Jags offense was about middle of the pack, which I think would surprise a lot of people, because I feel like the lack of production late certainly really, and of course Trevor's injury really hurt this team. But the defense was actually, when you look at power rankings or even stats, towards the bottom. Mm-hmm. So both sides of the ball certainly need to be fixed. And the other player that I think we all could have said may help this offense tremendously is Mitch Morse, the center. The relationship that he and Trevor will have to form in order to get the same relationship that he had with Luke Fortner, the communication and all that. But Mitch is then going to take the offense to hopefully be able to run the football. Yeah. And that does take pressure off your quarterback. So I really think all four are incredibly important acquisitions.
Yes. I just, again, maybe I'm buying more into that belief that the personnel was here and now they've fortified it further with the signing of Eric Armstead, addressing the defensive side of the ball with all but 2 draft picks or 3, I guess, if you want to count Keelan Robinson, who's more, or 4, and then Cam Little. So it's like 5 of their 9 draft picks were on the defensive side of the ball 2 weeks ago. It says to me that they've recognized that they didn't need to overhaul the defense, but there were things that needed to be fine-tuned. And you can make the same argument again to the Mitch Morse signing. They're fine-tuning the offensive line. Doug's company line of we didn't have the offensive line we wanted until week 17 or week 18 doesn't make sense because Ezra Cleveland wasn't on the team to start the year. So I don't really know how you could say that. But hey, to each his own. I think that, yes, for me, the offense, so long as the offense can get out of its own way, I think it will solve itself. The defense, it needs someone who's going to be more hands-on. And to your point, Taylor, Doug said, the reason I'm handing the keys to the offense to Press Taylor is because I need to be focused on more on the defensive side of the ball, which, again, let's go back a year ago. When he said that, did anybody kind of look around and be like, why does he need to be involved in the entire operation? You just went to the divisional round of the play. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, again, that's where there were things going on behind the scenes. And I'm not going to tell anybody how to do their job, but, and I go back to in December, to your point of should we have seen more leadership from Doug? I go back to, there were players that were like, yeah, Doug's got us working on tackling and stuff like that. And it's like, well good. Well, someone's got to coach you. Someone's got to be the coach. So here he is, he's trying, but
it just seems so fundamental and elementary tackling. It doesn't seem like you should. Although
Coach Campo has said when things aren't going well, that's what you should go to.
And in week 14, 15, you're just now noticing that these guys aren't getting the coaching they're needing. It's wild and it's scary. So hopefully all of that is kind of shifting with Ryan Nielsen, because I think that when we look at offensive but even defensively, when you go through, and we can talk about how many times did the offense give up the ball last year, and then the defense is running right back on the field. So we can play this game back and forth of whose fault it was and who was worse and who was better, who had more issues, because I think we can make the argument for both sides.
Yes, unfortunately. And you could even really also throw special teams in there.
Yeah.
Punting was fine, but kicking, obviously, with Brandon McManus down the stretch also didn't go according to plan. And so, there were issues everywhere.